Can the RTX 5080 provide a smooth ray tracing experience in the latest games when paired with a 1440p monitor, or will we have to use DLSS to make it happen? Let's find out. To test this, I'm using the MSI Supreme SoC version of the RTX 5080 paired with the Ryzen 7 9800X3D CPU as part of the Be Quiet PC build powered by MSI. And we'll be experiencing the games on one of the best monitors for the job, MSI 271QRX 360Hz 1440p QD OLED panel monitor. By the way, if you're interested in any of the products featured in this video, you can find them on Amazon at the links in the description below. Let's get started with the latest release, Assassin's Creed Shadows. We are at 1440p, field of view is set to 100, and we are using NVIDIA's DLAA, which means that we are at native resolution, no frame generation, and the graphic settings are absolutely maxed out, including ray tracing. And to my huge disappointment, we are seeing below 60 FPS on the screen. So unfortunately, the RTX 5080 cannot deliver a no-compromise native 1440p experience in modern games. Yeah. We'll see about the rest of the games in today's lineup, but it's not a good start. Although, to be fair, Assassin's Creed Shadows is not the easiest game to run, but still, 1440p on a GPU that costs well above $1,000, yeah, not a good look. Oh, and look at that, 45 FPS. So it looks like we kind of have to use DLSS resolution upscaling even at 1440p, which is kind of bizarre, but that's the way it is. Let's have a look. Is it going to be enough to use DLSS quality mode? At this point, I'm not sure, so let's give it a go. And I'm going to completely reload the game. FYI, I do this every time to ensure that the graphic settings are working correctly, because sometimes after some changes, the game just doesn't work properly. So, quitting and relaunching it is the best thing to do. So far, so good. 60 plus FPS, but barely. Have a look at that. 61 FPS. I'm pretty sure that we can find a spot where the performance will drop. Oh my god, yes, we did. 54 FPS right here. Wow. Okay. This is just... yeah. I have no words to describe this. $1,000 plus on the GPU, and we can't even get a 1440p experience using DLSS quality mode, 60 plus FPS. It's unbelievable. This should not be happening. This is just unacceptable. To be fair, this game still has some issues with its performance, so maybe in the future, with future patches, the game developers will resolve some of these performance inconsistencies, but as it stands right now, we can't get a 60 plus FPS consistently, even using DLSS resolution upscaling set to quality mode. Yeah. Using DLSS balanced on a 27-inch 1440p display is not really my favorite thing to do, because we will be losing some of the finer details, the image will look softer. It's not something I recommend, especially not when we're using a high-end GPU to run this game. Yeah, this is not the way things should work. DLSS quality mode, yes, I can accept it, because it looks quite nice on this screen, but DLSS balanced? Nuh-uh. That said, this is still a pleasant experience in my opinion. For me, yeah, it doesn't scare me that from time to time FPS drops to around 50-ish. I'm okay with it, I can live with it. I don't need to switch some settings to get us to that 60 FPS consistently. But if you are one of the people who require that at a minimum, no matter what, then the other option that you can do is either use frame generation to increase the image fluidity or lower some of the settings. Let's try frame generation first, okay? Let's enable that. Ignore the 1% lows monitoring stats because they are not displayed correctly when frame generation is enabled. This is a perfectly smooth experience. And we are getting well above 100 FPS, 120-ish, pretty consistently. But let's see, where is that spot where we had low FPS? Let's go there and see if we can drop it. Oh yeah, we already dropped below 120, so it's not a consistent 120 FPS experience, even when we're using frame generation. But it is a consistent 90-ish FPS experience. And the controls responsiveness feels just fine. So this is a perfectly good way to play this game. Frame generation looks quite nice in this game. I have no issues using it. I think I actually prefer running this game with frame generation enabled for better image fluidity. It just feels much nicer, especially on an OLED monitor where motion clarity is displayed exceptionally well. There is no ghosting, so this is a pretty good experience. What are my final thoughts on the performance in Assassin's Creed Shadows using the RTX 5080? I am quite disappointed that we couldn't get that 60 FPS experience consistently, even using DLSS resolution upscaling. But yeah, this is the world we live in today. It's not like there is a better alternative from AMD to do this kind of job. And the lack of competition is actually one of the main reasons why we didn't get a huge uplift in ray tracing performance with the arrival of the new generation of graphics cards from NVIDIA. The RTX 50 series performs pretty similarly in terms of ray tracing compared to the RTX 40 series. So it's not even worth an upgrade from one generation to the next. Nah, just keep your RTX 40 series card and enjoy it for another 2 years or so. Next, let's take a look at Cyberpunk 2077. It is an older title, but it is still extremely popular. Let's take a look at the settings. We are at 1440p resolution, and let's select the absolute maximum graphics quality preset, Ray Tracing Overdrive, which means that path tracing is enabled. This is what NVIDIA calls full ray tracing nowadays. Let's go ahead and use the latest DLSS model, NVIDIA DLAA, which means that we are at native resolution. No frame generation, and the only things that we will disable are film grain, depth of field, motion blur, all of the nasties that make the image blurry or unpleasant in any way, and we'll increase the field of view to 100. Path tracing is extremely costly to run, and I'm not surprised to see 40 FPS in an open world game such as Cyberpunk, because without ray tracing, the RTX 5080 would just be very happy in this game, very high FPS, but with path tracing enabled, yeah, it's just not possible. Once again, everything is bottlenecked by the ray tracing capabilities of the RTX 5080. And that's why we're seeing just 40-ish FPS on the screen, sometimes dropping even below 40. That is not great, but there is an alternative way to play this game, and we will explore that We can just lower the ray tracing quality preset. It doesn't mean that the game will look much worse, but I wanted to show you this particular settings configuration to make you aware that the RTX 5080 is not a zero compromise experience GPU, even at 1440p. Let's try DLSS resolution upscaling set to quality mode and see what happens. Wow, okay, 70 plus FPS. You see, this is the proper performance scaling in a well-optimized game in comparison to what we've seen in Assassin's Creed Shadows. This is a night and day difference. Yeah, from barely 40 FPS to 70 plus. This is what we want to see from performance scaling when using resolution upscaling. In Assassin's Creed Shadows, that wasn't the case, even though this game uses full ray tracing, and it still manages to run at above 60 FPS in some of the most demanding scenes in the game, with maxed out graphics, maxed out ray tracing, just by introducing resolution upscaling. And to be fair, I always say that DLSS quality mode looks very nice indeed on the 27-inch 1440p display. I use it all the time because I like having more FPS, so even when I am getting like 60, 70 FPS without DLSS, I tend to just enable it to get that extra performance for the extra fluidity. More frames is better when you have a high refresh rate monitor, of course. There is another settings configuration that is very much pleasant in my opinion. Instead of playing on the maxed out ray tracing, we could just use Ray Tracing Ultra, which means that path tracing is disabled, but most of the other things are still enabled. Ray traced shadows, ray traced lighting, as well as reflections. Yeah, that's all enabled. I wonder, can we get a pleasant experience using Ray Tracing Ultra preset at native resolution? Let's check it out. This settings configuration looks good visually, and it performs quite well. Take a look at that. We are at native 1440p resolution, and the FPS is still staying at around 60-ish. We're still getting all of the nice things from ray tracing. Reflections are high quality, looking good. The lighting, the shadows, everything looks near perfect. I mean, we're missing out on very few things compared to when we're using Ray Tracing Overdrive. Of course, that is the ultimate ray tracing setting, but this right here is a very nice experience indeed. And if you want a higher frame rate without losing too much in terms of visuals, then this is the way to go. Check it out. We are still seeing below 60 FPS from time to time, but most of the times it stays above 60, which is what we want to see. And if you are like me and you enjoy playing your first-person shooter games at 90-ish FPS at a minimum for that additional image fluidity, then you can enable resolution upscaling set to quality mode on top of that. FPS is now nice and high, above 100 sometimes, and even the 9800 X3D is starting to work quite hard. Take a look at that. We've seen something like 82% utilization on the CPU. Wow, okay. And the GPU load is dropping from time to time, so yeah, it appears that we are actually experiencing a CPU bottleneck over here. Interesting. But this is purely because there are so many NPCs in this particular area. If we go to a different area, then the CPU load drops and the GPU load becomes higher, more consistent. Yeah, take a look at that. We're back to normal, basically. 100 plus FPS. Of course, we can boost the image fluidity even further by using NVIDIA's DLSS frame generation. Let's set it to the 2x mode and see what the experience is like. Once again, ignore the 1% loss data because it is not displayed correctly. The frame rate is absolutely smooth, and since we're getting 180 to 170-ish FPS, yeah, the image fluidity feels amazing. Wow, this is very good indeed. Definitely a different experience compared to the one we've had previously. I'm not sure if I'd use it in this particular game, but it is definitely usable. The frame generation is something that you might want to try, because it's pretty much the only way you can get this kind of FPS in a AAA game with maxed out settings. There's just no other way, unless you want to wait for another 10 years or so for an extremely powerful GPU that would be able to actually deliver this kind of performance in this game. Of course, you can increase that frame generation to 3x or even 4x. I don't think that's necessary, but still, let's have a look at the 4x mode, just out of curiosity. Yeah, the frame rate now is absolutely insane, 300. The main reason I don't like the 4x frame generation mode is because it amplifies most of those visual imperfections that we're still getting in the game, and the more frames we generate, the worse those visual imperfections get. They are just being amplified with every additional generated frame. If there is like 50-50 in terms of real frames and generated frames on the screen, the overall image presented is pretty good. I would say that it is good enough to actually use in most cases. But with the 4x, I don't particularly like it. It is still usable, but I don't enjoy it. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is another recently released game where ray tracing delivers a superb visual experience compared to ray tracing disabled. Yes, let's take a look at the settings. We are at 1440p. The graphics quality is absolutely maxed out. We're using Supreme graphics quality preset. Full ray tracing is enabled, and we are using NVIDIA's DLAA, which means that we are at native 1440p resolution. And this is yet another proof that ray tracing is bottlenecking the experience in pretty much any game, because the RTX 5080 is simply not powerful enough in terms of ray tracing. It is extremely powerful in terms of normal rasterization performance, because let's take a look at this, yeah? We're getting something like 40 plus FPS, sometimes dipping into 30s, in one of the most demanding levels in the game, okay? But what will happen if we actually disable ray tracing? How much performance are we losing? Let's go ahead and just disable it completely and check it out. 130 plus FPS, 140 plus FPS over here, 150, 160. Yeah, just because the RTX 5080 doesn't have enough ray tracing performance, the experience in pretty much any game will be very similar if we are using full ray tracing. It doesn't matter how well the game runs without ray tracing. The bottleneck is the ray tracing cores on the GPU, which NVIDIA, I doubt that they've even updated them. Maybe they did, but I haven't seen a massive upgrade over the RTX 40 series in terms of ray tracing performance. And that is one of the main things that I was actually excited about. I wanted to see a good uplift in ray tracing performance. Unfortunately, we didn't get that with the RTX 50 series. But let's go back to testing ray tracing, shall we? Let's enable full ray tracing, and we'll enable DLSS quality mode as well. The RTX 5080 is saved by DLSS once again. Yeah. Using the quality mode upscaling, we're able to stay close to 60 FPS, although, as you've seen just then, 58 FPS. So it's not a consistent 60 plus FPS experience, even when using DLSS quality mode. This is a similar experience to what we've seen in other games so far, so once again, this is just in line with what I was saying to you previously. The ray tracing cores are bottlenecking the entire experience here, okay? Although in less demanding levels in the game, the performance is absolutely fine. Take a look at this, 90 plus consistently in this area right here, where we still have a lot of ray tracing going on, reflections, lighting, but because we don't have that many trees and leaves and grass and whatnot, yeah, the performance is much better now. And there will be a lot more scenes like this one here in the game, where the performance will be absolutely fine, even when using full ray tracing, but still, we have to use DLSS quality mode to make it playable across the entire game, because switching from one set of settings to another set of settings is not something that I like doing. I don't know, let me know. Do you usually switch your settings on the fly when you feel like there is not enough FPS? Let's check what happens if we use a lower ray tracing quality. Let's set it to the high ray tracing preset, and actually let's leave it on DLSS quality mode for now. So far I'm not seeing a massive performance boost, but let's see. We've experienced drops below 60 over here. And we're so close. Take a look at that, 60 FPS. We're so close to dropping below 60. Wow, okay. Yeah, you see, even lowering the ray tracing quality is not granting us a lot of FPS. We're not claiming back a lot of performance by simply dropping the ray tracing preset. Yeah. The only thing that works in this case is lowering the resolution, which means that we kind of stuck with using DLSS resolution upscaling. It's not the worst case actually, because as I mentioned previously, DLSS quality mode looks very nice on this monitor, and this is a perfectly good experience. But that doesn't mean that I am not sad to see that the 80 class GPU cannot deliver a no-compromise experience with graphic settings maxed out at native 1440p. We're not even talking about 4K here. This is 1440p. On the bright side, at least we managed to get a pleasant experience out of the RTX 5080, even using the full ray tracing. Yeah, I think it is pretty good, but it's not perfect, and we kind of just have to slap frame generation on top of that to make it a better experience, a more fluid experience, to make it feel like a high-end, high refresh rate experience. There we go, above 100 FPS. And frame generation actually feels quite good in this game. Yeah, this is perfectly fine. The controls are nice and responsive. No issues. In conclusion, the RTX 5080 failed to deliver a no-compromise experience even at 1440p, it still needs the help of DLSS resolution upscaling to run the latest AAA games with full ray tracing enabled. And you can't blame just the game developers for this, because it's on the GPU makers as well. NVIDIA failed to deliver a compelling ray tracing performance uplift with the arrival of the RTX 50 series GPUs. I think this is mainly happening because there is no competition, because AMD didn't bring anything to the table to compete with the RTX 5080 or the 5090, so NVIDIA didn't feel threatened enough to actually give us something more than they did with the RTX 50 series. Because AMD, yeah, the 9070 XT, it does work pretty well, but this is like an upper mid-range graphics card, and AMD's ray tracing performance is still nowhere near as good as what the RTX 5080 delivers. That said, we still managed to get a pretty good experience, in my opinion, at 1440p, thanks to DLSS, but it's just sad to see that even the 80 class GPUs nowadays that cost well above $1,000 cannot deliver a maxed out graphics experience, even at 1440p natively. That is just bizarre. Basically, you have to get an RTX 5090 for that. Wow, okay. I actually recommend pairing this graphics card with a 4K monitor. That will be a much better experience. There you can just use DLSS resolution upscaling to boost your performance, and on a 4K display everything just looks better, even with DLSS. By the way, I already made a video about the RTX 5080 4K ray tracing experience. I'll link it down below, if I don't forget, hopefully. I'll try not to. Anyhow, if you enjoyed this video, if you found it helpful, don't forget to reward my work with a like. I appreciate it a lot, it helps out a lot. And subscribe for more videos like this. And if you're interested in any of the products featured in this video, you can find them on Amazon at the links in the description below. It was I, Vadim. Until next time.